Okay, so in today's video, all I'm going to be doing is taking out the front wheel. I've got a new tyre I'm having fitted. The guy only charges me a minimal fee if I turn up with the tyre and that, so I do this quite regularly. So before you do this, if you haven't got the tools, I would suggest you don't bother. There's a possibility you might screw up or round one of the bolts or something like that, then all of a sudden your bike's going to be off the road and you're going to be all upset. So if you haven't got the tools, don't bother. Okay, so the tools you're going to need are, we need an Allen socket for the caliper bolts. Okay, now this is an original caliper bolt. Yeah, this is one I replaced a while back, and that requires a that requires a 6mm Allen socket. Okay, 6mm Allen socket. The clamp bolts, 2 on each side. Oh, and obviously two caliper bolts on each side. The pinch bolts, the original bolts, that's the original one there, were 12mm. Yeah, let's get it that way up. So the original bolts are 12mm. Okay. You're going to need an Allen key to undo the screws that hold on the front mudguard. There's 2 here and one just behind. Just come around here, one just behind the fork there. Same on both sides, and that is a small Allen bolt, and that's 4mm. You'll need a big hexagonal socket here. You can buy a dedicated one, or you can buy like this special tool here. It's got a drive at each end, and you can see here as I put it in that the size you need is 24mm. Okay, and then apart from that, all I've got here, I've got a couple of knuckle bars, and I've also got a set. You can see, for example, that the larger bar is a 1/2 inch drive, but I've got a set of step downs, so that will fit onto there. Goes from 1/2 inch to 3/8. I've got one that goes down from 3/8 to 1/4. Obviously this is smaller, but I've got the opposite, so I've got it that will go from 1/4 to 3/8 and 3/8 to 1/2 inch. So whatever size socket I've actually got a converter for either of the bars that I want to use. Okay, when I was talking about the different sockets, adjusters, Allen key bolts, Allen sockets, etc., I forgot to mention you need torque wrenches. Obviously everything needs to be torqued up correctly, so if you've got those, all the better. This is like a little sheet that I've taken all the figures from the manufacturer's specifications, and it gives me the torque settings for all the various frequent nuts and bolts that I take off. You know, as I say, caliper mounting bolts, the pinch bolts, the front spindle, the rear spindle, etc, etc. So they're all there and handy for me, so that I know what settings I need. These are already preset now at the moment. This one is set for the front axle pinch bolts. These two, the 2 there and the 2 there. Those two, and the large one at the moment is set for the front axle spindle to tighten and clamp the front wheel up. I will need to reset the torque setting on this one then for the actual calipers once they go back on, but I shall do that afterwards. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the bike up with the front wheel in the air. Now I do have separate videos for both the rear paddock stand, and I also have one for the front headstand. So I've put a link in the video so you can look at those individually. What I'm going to do now is get the bike up in the air, get the front wheel so it's free and rotating, and then I'll go through the method of how to remove the front wheel. Okay, so you can see that it's up in the air now. So what we need to do is we need to first of all unlock these two pinch bolts on this side, but not on this side. On this side it's a captivated nut, and if we undo the clamp bolts on this side, the nut will just turn with the bolt, so we need to keep the nut clamped. So we undo those two first, and then we'll just loosen off the axle bolt or the axle spindle. Okay. So that's them loose. So now I need the 24mm bolt. It's a 3/8 drive. I'm going to step that up to a 1/2 inch so I can use the bigger bar. Okay, so now that's loose, I'll now loosen off the clamp bolts on the other side. So they're all loose. I'm now going to remove the caliper bolts from each side and then just let the calipers hang down loosely. Okay, so before I start handling all of these, the dirty parts, the calipers and the actual wheel, I'm just going to put a pair of gloves on now. So that's the caliper off on that side. And that's the caliper off on that side. So now what we want to do is just going to finish taking out the actual axle bolt. Just make sure that nut's not turning on the other side. So get rid of the bar. Okay, so that's gone. So what I'll do now is I'll pull out the nut on the other side. Just make it through a little bit. So that's the nut from this side. Just pull up the wheel and start to pull out the bolt from this side. And we can just drop the wheel down. Now, you see now, the only thing is, is the mudguard. Now I can get this out with a bit of a squeeze, but I don't want to damage the mudguard. So while I've got the wheel there, very quickly, I just use this and undo the 6 bolts that hold the mudguard on. One is loose. So that's one out. Two out. Back. Tight. That one off. And there. On there. So now you can see that the mudguard comes right up, and you'll see that the wheel comes out really easily. And that is basically the quick way of taking your wheel out. Okay, so front wheel's out. I've taken it down the road, they've put the new tyre on it, and it's ready to go back in the bike. So the first thing we do before we put the wheel back into the bike is very, very important. We need to check the direction of rotation of the wheel.
It started
Now,
raining
on the
since
side wall of the
first
tyre,
part.
you should somewhere see
I'm
this
going to have to put
arrow
the
here, and that tells you the
tripod
direction of the rotation
inside.
of the wheel. Obviously this is very important because the tyre
that
tread is
should be
cut in
enough to
such
be
a
able
way
to see
to help
everything.
traction when it's wet.
And effectively,
And if
in
that's
the
all the wrong
Haynes
way
tradition,
around, then it's all wrong.
refitting
the
is
direction of
reverse
rotation it says here is
there or
that way,
thereabouts.
and obviously the bike is
So let's
facing
get on with it.
this way, so we need to turn that around, and the wheel goes in that way, so that's now ready to fit. So the first thing we need to do, we're going to place the wheel roughly in position, then we go into the, just need to get my gloves on. So the first thing we do is we get the wheel in position. What we need to do then is this is already clean, and I can see it's still got some of the lubrication on from when I last removed it and refitted it. So we're going to be picking the wheel up, putting the spindle through, and then we're going to get it started on the nut. doesn't look like a nut obviously, but the spindle does actually screw into this. Let's have a look. So it screws into that and then tightens up that way, and you can see it doesn't come off. So this is actually a nut, even though it looks like a tube. Okay, so we're going to put the spindle through and get it started on the nut to hold it in place. Okay, so I just place the very end of the nut in so it's there ready to receive the axle bolt. I'm going to start putting that through so that when I lift the wheel up, oh, I see, just move this caliper out of the way here, bring it round to the side slightly. You can see the bolt's gone through on this side, holding the wheel in place. So I can now just make sure it goes through the other side. And I can see it's come through on this side now. Now I push the nut in to locate the bolt into the nut. That's it. Okay, so I'll just quickly show you what's happened there. So we've pushed the bolt through, so it's pushed in through here, and you can see now that the nut has gone in, and now I'll start to tighten up the bolt or the axle spindle until it draws everything together. Once it's tight as I can make it just like that, what I'll do then is I will pinch up these two bolts. We'll be able to tell that needs to be all the way in and flush. Yeah, there shouldn't be any gap here. It should be flush up once it's tight. Once it's all flush and it's tight, I'm going to pinch those two to lock the nut in place. Then I'm going to back this back off, and then I shall tighten it and torque it up to its correct torque setting, and then we can tighten up these spindle lock nuts or locking bolts, pinch bolts. So that's what I'm going to do now. Just see if I can adjust this so it looks at everything a little bit better. Okay. Okay, so now the nut is turning on this side. So I can feel that. So that's now fairly tight. Okay, so what I'm then going to do is I'm going to push the axle nut all the way over that way and then pinch up the bolts to hold it in place. And they are 10 mil, aren't they? Yeah, that's all the way in, and then pinch and pinch. So now what I shall do is I'm going to torque this up to the correct torque setting. So this is the larger torque wrench, and I need to use a step down from 1/2 inch to 3/8 for the socket. So 1/2 inch to 3/8. Now when you torque up, I mentioned this in all my videos when I use a torque wrench, when you actually come to torque up the nut, the bolt, whatever it is you're tightening, you need to make sure that you do it in one smooth motion. Don't jerk down, because what happens is you overcome the spring tension with that sudden push of force, and if it clicks, you haven't actually got the true tension of the bolt tightening up in the nut. Okay, so you keep tightening. Okay, I can see the nut turning on the other side. So okay, so I've got the other torque wrench here. And these are 10 now. Again, so take that off there. I'm going to torque this up. Okay, I'm going to undo that because I didn't feel I torqued it correctly. So one continuous, there it goes. Same thing with the other one now. One continuous. Okay. So now we'll tighten this up and torque this one. There it goes. So now I'm happy with that. I shall now pinch up these two bolts, these two pinch bolts here. Remember, these are just pinch bolts, so they're not very tight at all. Okay, and that's that done. Now I'm going to be doing the caliper bolts with this, so I'll just reset this now to the correct tension for the caliper bolts, and then it's ready to go. Front caliper mounting bolts, 39 Newton meters. So I need to turn this up. There's 40. So set this to 40 and then back at 1. Lock it in place. That's ready to tighten that up in a moment. And with the one that I've now finished with, always do this with your torque wrenches. When you finish with them, wind the spring off straight away. That way you're not leaving the spring compressed, which actually loses its tension. So when you actually want to do a lower tension that you've left it at, the spring doesn't decompress as much as it should, and so you don't get a true reading. So always remember, wind off the torque wrench when you're finished with it. Done. So now we've got there, I'm going to put the mudguard back on in place. So that's the small 4mm Allen key, 3 on each side. Another thing I always recommend when you're fitting something like this, or a panel, you know, or a component, what you need to do is make sure that you put all of the bolts in loosely in the right place before you tighten everything up. Okay. So there's one. It's just in a couple of turns just to hold it in the right place. Two. And 3. Now I'll put the 3 in on the other side, and then there's one more little trick I need to let you know when you're doing this. What it is each of these bolts has got a shoulder on them. Okay, let's see if we can get that in there. So you see it's got that. See, it's got that shoulder. Now most of the time you'll see this, get the bloody thing into focus. So most of the time you'll see this is with bolts that are going through pieces of bodywork where you don't want to compress or push the bodywork. Okay. So the hole in the bodywork, or the hole in the front bumper, will fit over that shoulder. So what we don't want to do is actually catch the bodywork between that shoulder and the actual bodywork itself. Okay. So we get them started and loose, so that we know it's located in roughly the correct position. Okay, and then what we do is we turn them in by hand until they press up against the bodywork, and then if we move it, we'll feel the bodywork slot over the shoulder, and then we can tighten it up until it's hand tight. Okay, and we do that with all of them. Located properly, so that should go all the way in now, which it does without any problem. So what I'll try to do is show you how that works a little bit closer up. So tighten it up, hand tight, until the shoulder's now pressing. That shoulder is now pressing against the bodywork. Okay, but if I move the mudguard, move it around, should, there, and did you see it pop? That means now that the hole in the bodywork has now popped over the shoulder, so now when I screw this in, it will go all the way in. Okay, so that's correctly located. We have to do the same thing with all three of the bolts. I'm not sure if you might be able to see better with this one. So in that one you can actually see the shoulder is passing through the hole in the bodywork, and that's located correctly. So that shoulder isn't pressing against the actual bumper, the hole in the bumper is actually fitted and gone over the shoulder. Okay, so that now, if those two now are properly located, that means that this one should just screw all the way in, and it does. That's gone all the way in now and located correctly. Okay, back in here. Okay, there's no torque setting for these, so all I'm going to do is just pinch them up, and that's all they need. Okay. Use the ratchet actually. Shouldn't use the ratchet. Okay. So it's in, and all I'm doing is just pinch it up. Okay, make sure that's all the way in, which it is, and just pinch it up. This one's a little bit more awkward to get to, so I'll just put the extension on. Pinch it up, and just do the same thing with the other three on this side. Push that on, 2, and 3. All done. Okay, so now we want to put the calipers on. Now, when you take the calipers off, it's very important that you don't touch the brake lever, otherwise you're going to make the brake pads come out. So if I look, I can see there's a gap here, so all I have to do is just push them apart and then just give it a little wiggle, and what should happen is, there you see it slide forward, the brake pads are now gone over the disc. We just get it into the correct mounting position and start one of the bolts. Once you've got one of them started, then make sure the other one is in. Don't put one in and then tighten it up. Once they're both in, we can now tighten both of them up properly. That's the socket I'm using for this. So I want this small quarter drive step up, step down, sorry, from 3/8 down to a quarter for my socket there. And just put them in. Just put them all the way in hand tight. That's one. That's two. While we're here, we've already set the torque wrench to the correct setting. So always make sure, especially when using an Allen key or a hex socket, that the key is fully located, and then, as I said before, one progressive. Again. Okay, that was fine. That did turn as I was tightening. Again. So one progressive until it clicks, and that's one caliper on. Okay. Same thing on the other side now. Just to make sure we the pads are back all the way. And slowly just give it a small wiggle until you feel it just tap over the disc like that. One mounting bolt. Get one mounting bolt started. Okay, that one there. Put that one in. Tighten them up hand tight all the way in. That's one. Okay, now that's in place. Let's pinch them up and then torque them properly. Okay, so that looks as though that's about to go. So we're just going to back that off slightly and then tighten it again. One smooth motion. There we go. One. Two. And then, as I said before, now we've finished with this, make sure that you wind it off the spring. That's okay. That way afterwards. Okay. So the other thing I need to do now, finally, is on my particular model, I don't know if you can just see it here, but the brake hose is coming under the back between the wheel and the mudguard. I just need to make sure that goes over the top of the mudguard, and there is a clip that clips into a hole in the mudguard to hold it and locate it in place. I've just got to find that hole. There it is. Put that in, and that's it located. Okay. That's the wheel in. Pump the brakes up to make sure the pads are fully all the way out now. Yep. Okay, so a quick recap to make sure that we've tightened everything up. Spindle bolt's torqued up. Spindle bolt is torqued up. The pinch bolts, they're both torqued up. And the caliper mounting bolts are torqued up. So that's everything done, and basically that is how you remove and refit your front wheel.